From the massive post-war effort to put a man on the moon to the mapping of the human genome, incredible scientific progress has been made through large-scale national or international efforts. But in the age of sovereign debts and shrinking coffers, the question is, do we have the political and social will necessary to try and solve the many mysteries of science? Well, joining us now to help answer that, in Austin, Texas, Steve Weinberg, professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Texas at Austin and a Nobel laureate in physics. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, Sarah Seeger, professor of planetary science and physics at MIT. Also in Cambridge, Massachusetts, via Skype, Ashutosh Jogalekar, the curious wave function blogger at Scientific American. And closer to home in Waterloo, Ontario, Neil Turk, director of the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to you all. Neil, let me begin with you. When we're talking about big science, which we'll be doing so for the next 40 minutes or so, what exactly are we referring to? What does big science mean?
I think big science means major investments in basic research to understand fundamental properties of nature and the universe. And these are investments which require a large degree of public support.
All right, Ash, why do we need big science? Why is it necessary?
Well, there are some problems which can be addressed only through big science. I mean, if you want to collide particles at very high energies, you can largely do that using by building giant particle accelerators and colliders. So you do need the kind of public investment, large teams of scientists, support from politicians and so on for achieving specific goals in science.
Steve, do you see it that way? It's necessary to have big science?
Oh, yes, I do. I think there are things that can be done on a small scale, but especially as Ash mentioned, to get to the roots of things, the most fundamental principles, we unfortunately have to go to higher and higher energy in our elementary particle physics laboratories. We have to go to more and more elaborate observatories in outer space. There just doesn't seem to be any alternative.
Sarah, you're a Canadian.
I think it would be useful here if we agree on what a price tag for big science is approximately, just for the audience.
All right. Anyone want to throw out some numbers? What are we talking about money-wise?
Yeah, I would say an investments on the order of billions of US dollars would certainly count as big science. And I think what's necessary is to explain better to the public why such investments in the past have very often proved fruitful.
We are going to get into that,
Neil, as we move along. Yeah.
Sarah, I do want to ask you, you're a Canadian who spent much of your career in the U.S. You're studying exoplanets. If the funding gods granted you all the money that you wanted, what would you be spending that money on?
I know exactly what I'd be spending on it. It's definitely big science. It's one of those elaborated, sophisticated space telescopes that Steve was referring to. We would block out the light of a star and search hundreds or thousands of stars for planets like Earth.
Could you do that kind of research without the big science approach?
We absolutely could not. And exoplanets has gotten credit and kudos for being a small science approach. And that's because as a new field in its infancy 15, 20 years ago, we were able to do small science, and we call it picking the low-hanging fruit. I can elaborate now or later if you want.
Go ahead.
But just like most other sciences, we're funneling towards the harder and harder problems, which end up taking us to big science. Well, initially, one of my Canadian friends and colleagues, he's also in the United States now, Professor Dave Charbonneau, he was part of a team that found one of the first planets to go in front of its star as seen from Earth. We call that a transiting planet, and there's a variety of reasons of why they're the most useful and easily studied planets today. But that planet he found that was transiting was found with a 4-inch telescope in a parking lot in Boulder, Colorado. And that kind of gave birth to people deploying small telescopes on the ground all over our planet, looking for planets in that same fashion. But those kind of planets are all found now, more or less. And so then we have to move to more complicated ground-based search, and ultimately we will exhaust the things we can do that can make impact or give us good information, and we'll have to go to space.
Ash, let me ask you this. Can the mysteries of physics still be searched if we didn't have big science?
Well, I think it depends on the field. I mean, as Steve mentioned, particle physics seems to be a field where you need to go to those high energies and large particle colliders that are necessary for probing the deepest mysteries of matter and of the universe. But I think Sarah made a really good point that when a field is new, when it's a fledgling field, then you can tackle a lot of the low-hanging fruit and important questions using big science. In fact, that happened even with the precursor of particle physics, which is nuclear physics, which was largely done by tabletop experiments and expenditures of a few hundreds of dollars. So I think you have to identify the right area of physics. There's certainly some areas of physics that are newer than others, and I would think that those would be more amenable to small science than big science.
Stephen, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I think nuclear physics is a good example, although that began to get big in the 1930s. Lord Rutherford's initial experiment in 1911, in which he discovered the nucleus of the atom, had an appropriation of 70 pounds sterling from the Royal Society. And Rutherford, in subsequent years, sneered at the trend toward bigness in nuclear physics, building of larger and larger cyclotrons in the 1930s, saying that he could do physics with string and sealing wax, famous remark. Well, he did in 1911, but by the 1930s, the things that could be done with string and sealing wax had largely been done, many of them by Rutherford. And further progress required breaking into the nucleus with cyclotrons. Of course, by today's standards, the cyclotrons of the 1930s don't seem so big, but they seemed big at the time.
And Ash, pick up on that history lesson that Steve was just giving us. I mean, how did big science become the predominant approach in so many realms of solving the big mysteries that confront us?
Well, I think we really have to turn to the post-World War status of science and look at the Cold War. The Cold War really got people excited about physics. And it just turned out that at that same time, the mysteries of physics were ripe for big science. So the Cold War essentially allowed both politicians and the public to support physicists and listen to them and give them all the money that they wanted. I think that's how big science really started after World War II.
Well, I want everyone to pick up on the point that you just made. And Neil, let me begin with you. Given what Ash just said, without an enemy or a Cold War, can we still get the level of commitment from governments and buy-in from the public?
I think we can, but I think we need to completely change the approach. I feel that the past generation of particle physics and physicists have had tremendous support, basically trying to go to bigger and bigger colliders, and they were supported very generously by government on the basis of the contributions particle physics had made to the Second World War. I think that time is over. And I think it's time to change the case for big science. And I would include not just experiment, which is essential, but also the idea of raising the access to fundamental science to the vast pool of talent around the world. I think science is no longer a national game, and no one country will lead it. But there are billions of young people around the world who are fascinated with basic science and who deserve the opportunity to get involved. And many of the ways they can get involved are quite cheap, involve high-level training. And let's not forget that many of the breakthroughs in basic science, our picture of the world, were made by very talented, very lucky individuals, like Professor Higgs, who discovered the vacuum is full of this amazing field, the Higgs field. And that was the basis for the discoveries at the Large Hadron Collider. So I think we need to change the way in which science is seen, that science is an incredibly productive force for human society. It's fundamental to progress. And we need to, the scientists need to be better at explaining exactly why they are doing science and why this is fundamental to us as human beings, and why science, including big science, is going to be the basis for the future.
Sarah, help me out here. Do you agree with Neil says? Is it possible in this day and age of shrinking budgets and deficit for the buy-in to come from the public and the government when it comes to big science?
You know, it absolutely is possible. And now I'm in a different field. The previous people were talking about a field that started small a long time ago, got big, got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now has a level of maturity that the two fields I work in do not have yet. And those fields are exoplanets, planets that orbit stars other than our sun, and our ultimate, I like to call it the real search for alien life. And the other field I work in is, I call it space science engineering, where there's also revolution happening there. And I see the huge public support. Exoplanets are in the news constantly. I hear from people all over the world who want to get involved in exoplanets. I hear from local people at tech startups all the way through people from countries that aren't supported in the sciences and technologies. In technology. And so I think the public support is there, but the world is changing around us. I mean, think of social media and just news and internet and the way that now people in other countries can learn and be a part of science and the world in a way that in past generations were not able to. So we're seeing sort of a level of education and interest. I have never seen anything like this before.
But your science, exoplanets, I mean, it's kind of sexy. It captures the public's imagination. Is it as easy for other people who are studying things that maybe the public doesn't glom onto as easily?
Yeah, that's right. Exoplanets definitely benefits from that. I mean, many people are fans of Star Trek or Star Wars, and they're primed. They're definitely primed for it. So in that sense, it depends what the question is here. Is the question, are we too broke to ever do big science, or will our big science just be more focused on certain topics that people think are ripe or will have more impact?
All right, Stephen, hop in here. I see you want to get in here.
Yes, I wanted to pick up on what Neil said. Considering the email I get from people outside the scientific establishment suggesting new theories of the universe, I'm not at all optimistic that much will be gained by further opening of the scientific process to people outside the establishment. I think Higgs is a bad example. He was very much a member of the scientific establishment. He is, in fact, a professor at the University of Edinburgh. And what he did was done at just about the same time by 5 other people, 2 professors in Brussels and 3, well, another team, 1 in England and 2 in the United States. All members of the scientific establishment. I don't think that the sort of thing that Neil is suggesting offers much hope for the future. I think our problem is a problem of the large cost of experiment. Theorists like me come cheap, and we are not large absorbers of funding. The problem is that our theory dies without the stimulation of new data, and new data in many areas can only come with large spending.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree that there are certain fields of science which are very hard to open up to the general public. But I also think that there are certain areas where that's already happening, and biology is the science that comes to my mind right away. The last few years have seen the development of computer games, which are essentially fundamental scientific problems disguised as video games that are pitched to the ordinary citizens around the world. And one of the programs is called, one of the computer games is called Fold It. And what it does is that it pitches a very important scientific problem, which is protein folding. And what it does, it pitches it in the form of a language that ordinary people and laymen can understand. And you have had some very promising successes with this program. Just last year, they actually used the wisdom of crowds to find out the structure of a key enzyme that the HIV virus uses to hijack cells. So I think in certain fields it's definitely a problem, but there are also other fields where if you can pitch the problem in the right way to other scientists and to the public, you can use their collective intelligence to address it.
All right, I want to read something that Steve wrote back in 2012, a couple of months after the Higgs boson particle was tentatively confirmed. Here's what Steve wrote at the time. The discovery of the Higgs boson would be a gratifying verification of present theory, but will not point the way to a more comprehensive future theory. We can hope, as was the case with the Beavatron, that the most exciting thing to be discovered at the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, will be something quite unexpected. Whatever it is, it's hard to see how it could take us all the way to a final theory, including gravitation. So in the next decade, physicists are probably going to ask their governments for support for whatever new and more powerful accelerator we then think will be needed. I should mention for our audience, the LHC is the largest particle accelerator in the world, housed in Europe in a very expensive complex that is a collaboration of many governments. But Steve, you know, when you wrote this, you speak from experience. Tell us about your efforts to build the SSC, the Superconducting Super Collider.
Yes, well, looking forward to the struggle to build the next large facility in elementary particle physics, which I think is quite necessary. I recall the experience we had in the late 1980s and early 1990s in trying to get funding continued for an accelerator to be built in the United States called the Superconducting Super Collider, which as designed would have had 3 times the energy that the LHC will have when it's finally completed, and would have been able to have discovered the Higgs boson and perhaps other exciting things that are entirely new long ago, more than a decade ago. That project was canceled. It was canceled, I think, after almost $2 billion had been spent and the tunnel largely dug, by a fit of Congress who were attempting to show that they were able to resist the lure of spending on what in America is called pork barrel items. One of the reasons the Super Collider was canceled was because it came into conflict with spending for the large space station, the International Space Station, which was also seen as a Texas project. The Super Collider would have been in Ellis County, Texas, and the space station would have been, in fact, is run by the Johnson Manned Space Flight Center in Houston. The International Space Station had the advantage of costing about 10 times as much as the Super Collider, which meant that there were 10 times as many lobbyists who were pushing for it, and Congress preferred it to the Super Collider. Although, as things have worked out, it has so far, with the possible exception of recent experiments, which could have been done more cost-effectively in an unmanned facility, it has produced nothing of scientific value. In fact, I wanted to disagree with the opening lines of this program in which the moderator said, from the mission to put men on moon in the 1960s to the genome project, science has become big, and so on and so forth. Well, the mission to put men on the moon had nothing to do with science. It has produced nothing of scientific value. And one of the things that makes the funding of real science so difficult is the competition it faces from a spectator sport, like the manned spaceflight program.
Okay, I know everyone wants to jump in on this.
One thing I can say from here is that we always like to say, you know, there are 3 main motivators. And, you know, we have to face it. We're fighting millions of years of human evolution, how we're hardwired to see the world. Fear, curiosity, and wealth. And so, yes, the Cold War was motivated by fear. We also do have curiosity and wealth as the motivators. And it's true that we can't always just put pure science for big science. But we do have other ways around it. And I would have to disagree about all of going to the moon as being useless. They did bring back rocks, which are still studied today. And they're still revealing things about the moon that actually are useful for understanding planet formation.
All right, Neil, go ahead.
No.
I mean, we're still facing that
I
today.
think Steve has a profoundly pessimistic worldview, perhaps based on the fact of the extraordinary success of particle physics over the last few decades, as I say, fueled by the role physicists played in the last war. And I think it's very important to change perspective, to realize that the world has changed. The center of gravity is shifting. It will no longer be the United States. And one needs to respond to this by making fundamental science much more open, much better at communicating. And I think he's misinterpreted what I said. I was not advocating some kind of radical new science involving a completely different way of doing science. I was advocating the widespread availability of training of young scientists in other countries than the US. There is talent and genius around the world, and I think physics, fundamental physics, has actually been rather bad at strategically developing youthful talent, bringing it into the field, and enabling people to come up with innovative new ideas. Higgs in his time did that. His ideas were not popular initially. There are many other young people around who are potentially capable of doing that. And in fact, the institute I direct is founded on the idea we need to strategically develop not just big science experiment, but places where people can be imaginative, creative, come up with truly original ideas, which live up to the beautiful discoveries we've made about the universe. I mean, what I cannot understand is how Steve can be pessimistic when we've just seen the Higgs particle, predicted nearly 5 decades ago. Amazing achievement of fundamental mathematical physics in anticipating the structure of the universe on a scale of 1/1000th the size of the atom. This is stupendous. Simultaneously, we've mapped the whole universe, and we've discovered incredible beauty and simplicity in the pattern emerging from the Big Bang, the pattern of variations in density that later gave rise to galaxies. These things are a profound challenge to basic theory. Our theories currently do not really explain this simplicity. In fact, they're somewhat at odds with it. And I think Steve has, personally advocated this picture of a multiverse, which in my view is sort of fuzzy-headed thinking, which no doubt has also contributed to his pessimism.
All right. Steve, you've been called a pessimist a few times.
May I respond to some of that?
You can. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know where Neil gets this idea of Higgs as being a solitary figure outside the establishment producing ideas that were generally disregarded at the time. Well, it was only 3 years after those papers by those 6 people I mentioned that those ideas were incorporated into what is now the standard theory of weak and electromagnetic forces. Furthermore, Sarah's remark about the astronauts bringing back moon rocks, yeah, they did, but the Russians also brought back moon rocks with unmanned missions. My point is not that putting people in orbit never produces anything scientifically, but that it never produces anything scientifically in a cost-effective way. And that in
yes, I
particular
wasn't
is
disagreeing
true.
about the people, but in general, the idea that there are other motivations that we can get
And I would
science
finally say I'm not at all pessimistic about the past. It's only the future I'm pessimistic about.
Sarah, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to say this is a time for lessons learned from Steve, at least for me. I come 40 years later, and I'm about to embark on my own version of not perhaps the SSC, but ginormous space telescopes we can find the Earths, and I have to plot how to do this strategically. So I think we should take his pessimism of the future and optimism of the past and see how we can deal with it. And I'd like to build upon the positive example of how going to space or other reasons, commercial or political, can still get us there. And that's the whole, we call it here the private commercial spaceflight world, where SpaceX and others are trying to dramatically reduce our costs to get to space. And that kind of thing can only be helpful for science.
Sarah, let me ask you this, though, and not to be a pessimist, but we are, in an economic downturn. And within that context of where we are in 2013, is science at this point a luxury?
That's a great question. I actually am on both sides of the fence on that one. I see, at least for astrophysics, many times I wake up and I'm like, this is a luxury. I'm so grateful that we can be a part of it. On the other hand, as a society, should we be able to think big? Should we be able to inspire others for when the time comes that we have big science available? Should we be training people and stimulating them to think intellectually, those same people who are going to go out and work in our Department of Defense? I mean, I think the answer to all of those things is yes. And one time, there was a nasty, argumentative, aggressive article in the New York Times right after the Kepler Space Telescope launched. And they said, shouldn't that $600 million gone to welfare and to, programs to help people in the country who are struggling? But if you do the math and the economic, and I'm not like the others on this panel, I'm not an economist, but if you actually do the math, each of those, it's a jobs program. Almost all of that money went into people, and each of those people that got some of that money went and spent money supporting 3 other people. Money just for goods and services. So in reality, I think we should take some of the money in our society and spend it on things like this. So while science is a luxury, it is, but some of it should always be continued for the reasons I gave.
Ash, what do you think of that? Is science a luxury right now, one that we can't afford, big science?
Oh, well, you know, like Sarah, I think I find myself on the fence too. I mean, obviously, we have to address these big questions, not just because they are intrinsically important and they sort of satisfy our sense of wonder, but because as the history of science shows, there are a lot of spin-offs that come from addressing these big questions. And I think that's an angle that we can sell to the public, because it's not always easy to convince the public that we should be spending all that money on particles or discovering exoplanets. I think that there's really two things we should do. First of all, try to communicate the sense of wonder that we have when we make these discoveries. And that should really start in the classroom. That should start in school and college. And the other thing that we should point out is all the spin-offs that have come from big science. You know, the internet was a spin-off of science done at CERN. So I think these are the sort of twin pillars of big science that would help us to sell it to the public and keep it alive.
Neil Turk, let me ask you, because the Perimeter Institute is the first in Canada that a private individual founded to solve the big mysteries of theoretical physics. Given that it's funded by private dollars, how important is it that it succeeds?
Actually, it's funded both by private donors and by the governments of Ontario and Canada. One of the unique things about it is that it is a public-private partnership, much the same way that SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk, operates in the same way. And this is one of the ways in which science needs to transform itself, so it makes its case better. It involves private support as well as public support. And I see huge possibilities for this. One of the things nobody has mentioned is the fact that the quantum world, essentially discovered by physicists in the 1920s, is looking increasingly likely to be the seed of the next great revolution in electronics, that there will be quantum electronics, quantum sensors, quantum communicators, quantum computers. And these things will likely drive the industrial revolution of the 21st century. And this is big science, but it's not a single accelerator or a single telescope. It is support for laboratories trying to understand the basic physics of materials and how electrons and other particles behave in these materials in quantum mechanical ways. This is extremely promising and of profound importance to the future economy and the future of society.
Steve Weinberg, have these folks convinced you to be more optimistic?
Oh, I'm on their side. I think we're now in a state in which we have excess productive capacity and an insufficient consumer demand, so that almost any kind of government spending would help the economy. Ash and Neil and Sarah have given good reasons why spending on science is particularly valuable, better, say, than just digging ditches and filling them up again. And I am in complete agreement with that. But I would say that there is a problem here, that you can say the same about, say, spending on education. On which I can only speak for the United States, not for Canada, on which we do not spend remotely enough. You can say the same on spending on health care delivery, as well as medical research. You can say the same on an infinite number of other things that government should be doing, including having more judges so that civil cases don't take years to settle, increasing the size of the patent office so that patents can be issued within a reasonable time, and on, meat inspection, border security, whatever you like. All of these are valid aims for government, and they're all in competition with each other. And I think what we need is not so much making an effort to compete for science to make an effort to compete with the other needs for government spending, but to get together, and again, I'm speaking as an American, for an increased level of government spending in general, for a shift of our economy away from private goods, more toward public goods, where our society really lacks things. I mean, we have wonderful flat-screen televisions and handheld iPhones and so on. Meanwhile, our roads and bridges are crumbling. There's something wrong with the balance of public versus private spending, and the question of spending on scientific research is only one part of that much larger issue.
All right, Sarah, let me pick up with you on that point about public spending versus private spending when it comes to big science, though. You know, people like Elon Musk, Mike Lazaridis, funding big science projects. What's in it for them?
Well, the thing is, they're not funding big science. This goes back to our previous comments about whether or not we can hope that science can benefit from other people's efforts. For Elon Musk and others, I don't know their true motivation. We love to imagine that Elon Musk and others like him want to be the first people to go to Mars, and we kind of think that's what might be motivating them to get there. And so it's been great, though, to watch from aside or be peripherally involved with this private commercial spaceflight world and see them investing their own money to do this. Another one I'm involved with is asteroid mining, and whether that's a bit of a controversial topic, but I have not seen the level of enthusiasm from young engineers at MIT and from others, always young people, super excited about this. You know, I've been out to Planetary Resources, one of the two asteroid mining companies. I've seen their lab. They have billionaire backers, people investing in their company, and these people are going to make it easier for all of us to get to space, and some science is going to be done along with it. So in that sense, the motivations there are wealth, curiosity, and things like that. But we have to partner with that private sector also.
Ash, are you hopeful for the latest big science project in the U.S.? The Obama administration announced the mapping of the human brain?
Yes. So the mapping of the human brain, I think, is a great example of a big science project, which to some extent can also be done using small science. I think the issue that people have raised with that project is that to address one way of understanding the brain, which is understanding the activity of neurons at an individual level. And that's certainly a valuable approach. But the thing with the brain is that it's built up on several levels. It's a classic example of what we call an emergent structure. So there's other ways and other levels at which you understand it, especially in terms of the different modules of the brain that talk to each other and give rise to things like memory and cognition. I think the problem with all big science projects is that they can confine themselves to a limited set of approaches, and therefore they may not really encourage the kind of diversity of ideas that are necessary to tackle the big problems in any field, especially in the fledgling field like neuroscience.
Neil Turek, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if we are speaking about basic physics, our understanding of the universe, of particles and forces and the vacuum and the structure of the whole universe, I think at the moment the way I'd put it is that big science experiments have yielded these fantastic results which theory is struggling to keep up with. And so my view is that actually within that field, the ball is firmly in the court of theory right now. Of course, there is no substitute for experiment in testing theories, but I think right now we simply do not have the theories which live up to the extraordinary simplicity we have seen in the universe. And so for me, that's very exciting. It's not a reason for pessimism. It's a reason to think that maybe we're on the threshold of another great revolution, just as there was a revolution in the early 20th century when quantum theory and relativity were invented. And those really laid the seeds for much of the industry of the 20th century, certainly electronics and many devices like lasers and CDs and so on, and GPS. And so I think to be pessimistic about the understanding of physics and how crucial it is to the future of humankind is really to miss the fact that our entire society today is built on the discoveries of basic physics of the last century. So I think it's very important for scientists to find ways to communicate to the public and to politicians that human society has progressed through this basic understanding of the universe. And I think we've been quite poor at really explaining this and how fundamental this is to our existence. And we need to improve. But if we do, I see huge possibilities. All the companies who made their fortune on the back of the internet, as Elon Musk, for example, did, those companies are led by people who are naturally very sympathetic to fundamental science. And that's why I think they're actually excellent prospects for match funding and other more creative models of how to pursue fundamental science in maybe not a huge way, but at least medium-scale projects can be done in partnership to make the case for the very big-scale projects which will require international collaboration, go beyond country boundaries, and which hopefully the whole planet will take delight in.
All right, folks, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, all four of you, for your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.